Hi, welcome or welcome back. I'm Eleanor, and this is the 11th day of the Sealy Challenge. We are no longer in Carl Phillips territory. We are in quite a different world. We are in the world of Franny Choi and her book, Soft Science. It came out in 2019, and interestingly, she's about to come out with a new book later this year. So this is just very timely for me to finally read her book. It's a very strange read in the very best way. I would say that the first thing you're going to notice when you pick up this book is that it has a glossary of terms right at the beginning. Star, ghost, mouth, sea. Each of those is given 5 categories: meaning, see also, antonym, origin, and dreams of being. So you can already tell this is a new linguistic world we're going into. We're going to need a different vocabulary. We're going to have to think outside of the usual parameters of our language. It's very exciting, but you will be disoriented. If you're prepared for that, you'll be fine. Don't be frightened. It's a very, very exciting world. The other thing I notice immediately is that it's dedicated for all my sisters. And there are 2 quotes, but one in particular was interesting to me because it was a quote from Donna Haraway. I looked her up. I'd never heard of her before. Now, she's a very, very interesting thinker. She's a professor at University of California, has been for many years as far as I can tell. She's a professor in history of consciousness and the feminist studies department. And she is famous apparently for her 1985 essay called Cyborg Manifesto, which will mean a great deal once you start this book. The quote is as follows: "We are excruciatingly conscious of what it means to have a historically constituted body." So, okay, here we are. Who is Franny Choi? She's an Asian American. She is queer, and she has been working for years as a poet, both on the page and slam poetry. She has also been presenting, up to recently, the Verses podcast, which I spoke about in the previous video, together with Denise Smith. So let's get into the book. What we have here is a very unusual world, which has in it a combination of figures that sometimes they feel human, sometimes they're not. There is mention of cyborgs, but I wasn't certain at any one point who the speaker was, who was the human, who was the cyborg. I think that's definitely the whole purpose of the book. There's 6 parts to the book. Each one is a kind of Turing test. Now, a Turing test is a test to see if you're human or if you're a machine. And so, for example, the first Turing test starts off the first section, and it says, this is a test to determine if you have consciousness. And all of the tests, as far as I can tell, all of the test poems are written in this way where there are these slashes, as you can see. And I will say that reading those is difficult. It's difficult because the language seems to be, the language and the form seem both to actively evade the reader. And this is not because Franny Choi is not a good poet. This is because this is exactly because she is a good poet, because she's turning you away from the language that you think is benign, and she's showing you that if you go into her world, you'll see things differently. What will you see differently? Well, it can be any number of things, but I think primarily what Franny Choi is most interested in is the interrogation of what it is to be a woman in the world, a woman specifically in America, specifically an immigrant in America, and also being Asian and looking different. I think there is also a very strong undercurrent of queerness and how that changes your view of society, and how society often doesn't even have the language to accept you, even if they wanted to, which generally they don't. And this all happens within these poems that have very unusual forms. I would say that most of the book feels like some sort of a conceptual experiment, but taken as a whole, and if you are very patient, you will get to the latter half, or maybe the latter third of the book, where you really feel that you're connecting more with the speaker or speakers in the poems, and understanding their relationship to you as the reader and to society. Now, scattered between these more conceptual poems, you will find a few poems that are just straight down the line. They are what they claim to be. And they remind you of Franny Choi. She's a young woman, living today in the US. And I, as an older woman, in my 50s and not in the US, I looked up several of the references, and I see that there are references here to things that I haven't been aware of. And also there's science fiction references, a few of them that if you're interested in that, you might have picked up that I didn't. What I did pick up on is something that happened in the last part that really excited me. And that is a sequence of poems called Chat Roulette. Now, of course, I had to look up Chat Roulette. It's a chat website, apparently, that randomly assigns each person to two other people, and you can chat in a virtual room, and then you go on. If you want, whenever you want, you can just turn around and switch to a different room. Well, this is a sequence of beautifully crafted sonnets. Now, it's not necessary to know even what a sonnet is to appreciate it, but I really do appreciate these sonnets. And they are, amongst other things, about what it's like for a person, in this case a woman, to voluntarily go into this chat website, and what it feels to be, in a way, a cyborg, because you're not fully human, you're attached really to the technology. And that is something that the professor and philosopher Donna Haraway, from the quote at the beginning, talks about apparently quite a lot. So you're kind of cyborg, and you're there by choice, but things happen to you, that you can't control, and what that means, and how that affects you, perhaps at your very core, perhaps with, in your sexuality. And it's all written in iambic pentameter, from what I can tell. And I do admire that very much. There's something in me that has become more and more geeky with the craft of poetry. And I especially enjoyed the third sonnet that starts, these salt-logged gifts, they promise me I'm real. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to write it out, which is what I'm starting to do now, and I'll read it, and then I'll talk about it a little more. Okay, this is a crown of 5 sonnets. This is the third one. The last line of each sonnet is the first line of the next sonnet. That's all it means. Okay. These salt-logged gifts,
They promise me I'm real. My body is its image here. My image just an always dying thing, asking its own disgusting question. Yes, I do have bones. I gag on water. Yes, my blood eats air and makes a mess beneath my skin. And what do I consume? Whatever keeps me flesh. Tonight, a tide of faceless supplicants who call me by the name my mother made with mud and marrow, veins, vermilion, silk. They call me baby, call me vertebrate. They christen me with tongues against the glass. I drink and drink their looking till I'm soaked. I drink and drown in want. I drink and choke.
Okay, so I'm back, and I wanted to mention that, there's so much in here, and I think I don't really need to say very much about the subject matter because I feel I'll ruin it. And also, I'd like this to work as a small aperitif, as an appetizer. And I think for me, when I find something in a book that I really love, and in this case, what a treasure, an entire sequence that I love, then when I go to reread the book, because this book has to be reread, I'm already beginning, because I have a connection of enjoyment, I'm already reading it differently. And also continuing to go back to the glossary that she's written at the beginning, which is fascinating in and of itself. I do want to say something that, correct me if I'm wrong, anyone out there who knows more about, the art of metrics than I do. But there's a particular line, with mud and marrow, veins, vermilion, silk, that I feel I just love that line. And I love it because of the use of the I ams, and then at the very end, the 3-beat anapest, I think, from what I'm scanning. So I've got with mud and marrow, veins, vermilion, silk. So Leon Silk, it's just so beautiful. Leon Silk, it's, I believe, an anapest, and so that gives you the 5 beats with mud and marrow, veins, vermilion, silk. So that's a little geeky aside. One more thing I see in my notes about evading the reader. This is done in many different ways, through using this strange glossary, so you're not even sure as the reader if you know the definition of words even. Then there's the use of pronouns that seem to float. Sometimes there's a you, sometimes there's an I, sometimes there's a he, she, and definitely there's the beautiful series of 12 moon poems that are types of love poems from my reading of them, which use the plural first person we, which are amazing. Some of the poems seem like they might be persona poems, and again, like, who is this persona? Not quite sure. The punctuation is mostly odd, and at times there's so much language that's so not cryptic, because it's different. There's a deluge of language that comes towards you that feels alien. And this is again where the cyborg language comes in. It feels alien. It really isn't. It's just a matter of acclimating to it. So I really hope that you will pick this book up in preparation for Franny Choi's new book that's coming out maybe in November. And tomorrow I will read Dennis Smith's book, Homie, which I'm very much looking forward to, because they're obviously great friends, which you can tell from the Verses podcast. And I think they go way back as friends and poets working together. Okay, I'll see you tomorrow. And don't forget, the only real property is the property of the mind.